There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between radio and bar talk, between commentary and recaps, and it lies between the pit of man's Netflix subscriptions and the summit of his binge-watching ability. This is the dimension of podcasting and the Twilight Zone. These are the Zone-i-Sodes. And now your hosts, Brandon Davis and Scott McFarland.
And hello to all of you out there in podcast world. This is the Front Row Movie Reviews. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and we're the podcast for people who actually like movies and TV sometimes. And this is our special series where we are trekking through the entire history of the Twilight Zone episode by episode. This is Zone-i-Sodes. And I have here with me my companion through this journey.
For better or worse, I'm Scott.
And today we are talking about episode 19, The Purple Testament. We're almost to the 20s, Scott.
Yeah, and we are knee deep into 1960 now too. So
yeah, we're into February. So
okay, maybe ankle deep.
We're talking about The Purple Testament, which aired February 12th, 1960, and really interesting episode. We've mentioned before about how some of the most episodes of the Twilight Zone have to do with the military because Rod's service had such an effect on him, and this is one of those episodes where it's really reflected. I guess, though, before we get started, do you have a plot synopsis written for this episode?
I sure do, sir.
All right.
We find ourselves in the Pacific theater of World War II. William Fitzgerald is a lieutenant who finds he has the ability to see who will die before they do. First, he knows that 4 of his men will die during the next day's battle. He then sees the look of death on a wounded soldier in the hospital. Finally, he sees it in his commanding officer, Captain Riker. Our first Star Trek reference? ? Fitz warns Riker, but Riker goes off to fight anyway. But Riker does leave a few personal effects, including his wedding ring, behind. After Riker does die, Fitz is told he will be getting some R&R. But when he gets into the Jeep that will take him back to the headquarters, Fitz sees death on the driver's face. Fitz accepts his fate, and we hear an explosion in the distance when the Jeep drives away.
And I will read here what Rod has to say at the beginning of this episode. Infantry Platoon, U.S. Army, Philippine Islands, 1945. These are the faces of the young men who fight. As if some omniscient painter who had mixed a tube of oils that were at one time earth brown, dust gray, blood red, beard black, and fear yellow white. And these men were the models. For this is the province of combat, and these are the faces of war. Oh, really interesting episode. What are your first impressions of this episode, Scott?
Well, first off, this is our first real true World War II episode. We had World War I a few weeks ago, but really we will have quite a few more. And it's interesting to see any kind of media that is not so far removed from that war. You know, we're less than 15 years from V-Day, and with the Pacific Theater being chosen, it also probably, and it definitely would also bring some thoughts of Korea, which wasn't too far removed as well from this too. In terms of my first reactions, I haven't seen this one too much. It's a pretty cut and dry episode. You can definitely tell it's like one quick idea that they kind of drew out for 25 minutes. But I do like the fact that we're delving into a subject of, well, two subjects. One, war, and specifically World War II, but also fate and destiny and the like.
Yeah. This episode was one I hadn't seen either. And you're right, it's a simple idea, but I think it's carried out so well and the actors are good in it. So it's really effective. Had you had a lesser cast, this probably would have been a lesser episode in my mind, but I think they do a really good job with it, and it doesn't stay on, even though it's a simple story, it doesn't stay on one note the whole time. For me, William Reynolds, who plays Fitzgerald, really helps to carry the episode, and he doesn't play it, melodramatic. He just plays it, very sort of not matter of factly, but just sort of, okay, this is what's happening. And I think that he really is one of the strengths of this episode. And also playing Riker, of course, Dick York, Darren #1 on Bewitched, the best Darren.
It sounds like you may be a little bitter about Darren too.
They didn't even acknowledge that the first Darren was gone, but kind of, yeah, with the Beckys, kind of, yeah.
Although Becky #1 is coming back for the new Roseanne coming out later this year. It's the original
That's
cast.
true. That's true.
Speaking of, nothing that is on point. That's where I'm at.
But no, let's just get into what do you think are some of the strengths in this episode? What works for you?
I love, as you mentioned, Fitzgerald obviously holds this all together because it's his story. But I love when the troops are returning from battle, the first scene. And again, this isn't sugarcoating war. I mean, obviously we don't have a budget. This is literally 2 sets the entire time, 3 if you count the tent. So we're not going to see any battles. We're not going to see any big special effects or anything else. But when these guys come off the truck and they're jumping off the truck, you can see war in their faces, which is pretty well connected to what we're going to have happen, because we find out that Fitzgerald is seeing something in their faces. They kind of play with the light when he looks at the people, so maybe it's just some kind of a glow or something that we're not seeing. But so looking at their faces right away is very important. And then when we get back from the first stop and go into the main part of the episode, we see immediately that there is something wrong with Fitzgerald, and the fact that he's kind of shocked that what he thought was going to happen has come true, and these 4 guys are dead. So I really like how it starts off.
It's funny you mentioned the 3 sets, and I noticed the set where he goes to visit the doctor. The main lobby is a set we've already seen. It's the entry room and the 16mm shrine, and then we will see it again next week.
We're gonna see that. We're gonna see that little alcove a couple times here pretty quick.
but I think, like you said, it's the actors that carry this. I love I love the scene between Fitzgerald and Riker when they're, starting to figure out what's going on with Fitzgerald, and I think they both play it really well. I think Dick York as Riker plays it skeptical but sympathetic at the same time. So it's it could have been sort of one-dimensional, and they make it a little more dimensional than it could have been.
I keep waiting for Jonathan Frakes to pop up, man.
Yeah.
Every time you hear Riker, I'm just like, Jonathan Frakes, what?
Yeah. Yeah, but the theme of this episode though really sort of is interesting, because when you're I can't imagine, because I haven't been in that situation of going off to battle or anything, but you've got to think that there's some part of you that feels that sense of doom, that you're not going to come back. And that's part of, I think, of what Serling's tapping into in this episode too.
Well, and imagine that you are a commanding officer, mid-range commanding officer, so you know these troops well. They're in your platoon, you work with them day in and day out, and you start realizing that you are going to be able to pick them out of the crowd and be able to tell which ones are not coming back. That is amazingly insane. And the fact that he has no choice. I mean, he talks to his commanding officers, he talks to Riker, he talks to the colonel or whatever he is, and they're not going to believe him, because no one would believe him. So no one's going to take these guys off the front line. So he's having to send these folks to their death. And at the beginning of the episode, we learned that he did write down those 4 names the day before, which also tells me that this is probably not the first time this has happened. Fitzgerald's kind of explaining it and saying that he's starting to see this, but I don't think you would write down those 4 names just because you had something wrong with your eyes. I think this is something where it's starting to build on him, and he's probably had this experience before. So it's amazing that he isn't basically curled up into the fetal position in his tent at this point with all the stress that is bearing down on him.
Yeah, well, you can tell he's world weary even at the beginning of this episode. You know, it has to have given some wear and tear on him. So, you know, this is sort of building up, of course, to the, you know, climax of the episode, you know, where he you know, eventually accepts his fate. But yeah, as I mentioned before, though, I think that Serling, Serling did write this episode. I think he builds it up. He builds it up very well, because you have, you know, him dealing with the fate of others, you know, of course, dealing with the death of Riker. But then as he deals, you know, with his fate, he sort of accepts it in a much more subtle manner, like it's all sort of been building up to this.
Yeah, well, and that's a key point too. Is you have this theme of acceptance, and it's not just Fitzgerald. Obviously, he's the main one, but we know Riker accepts it too, because even though Riker kind of still isn't entirely sure if it's true or not, you don't go off to battle and leave your wedding ring behind.
Yeah,
you don't leave your personal effects and photos behind for somebody to find unless you assume that this is the last time you're leaving the camp. So Riker has also understood that his destiny is going to come a calling, and he is maybe not prepared for it, but he has accepted it.
Yeah. I also like the I just like the idea that Serling brought into the episode of at the point when Fitz doesn't really want to reveal that, you know, Riker's impending doom is coming, because, you know, the fear of mutiny possibly happening, and that brings a whole other sort of level to it as well. So, you know, really, you know, a really, really interesting topic that I kind of feel, you know, had Serling explored it more, he could have added more levels to it. But I guess we'll let that segue into what doesn't work for you in this episode, Scott.
Yeah, there's not much. This isn't one of those really good ones. I kind of mentioned that it is very bare bones, and we can see that this is one of the episodes that we're not going to use a lot of the budget on for the season. But it's okay, because this is a character play. This is 3 or 4 people sitting in several different rooms talking. And so it's one of those where we can easily see that there is a lot going on without having to be shown all of the pomp and circumstance that is a big budget motif. I think, no, I mean, I'm not going to say this is a perfect episode, but there's nothing really for me that stands out as something that I would have changed. So yeah, I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, I really, to me, you know, this is, like I said, Serling is great at writing very concise, very cleanly told stories that really could just be told in a paragraph. And they're great little morality plays and great little morality tales. And like, I really don't think there's much I would change about this episode. You know, like I said, since we've been watching them in succession the way we have, you might see an episode of this in a rerun sort of out of order or whatever, and it might stand out to you a little bit more. But since we've constantly been watching, you know, really, really strong ones, although we watched one of our least favorites a couple episodes ago, episodes like this sometimes might stand out to you a little bit more. I was reading just a little trivia about this, and this actually was one of the themes used when they tried to revive the series in 2002, an episode called Into the Light. It was a concept of seeing light on the face of those who were about to die. And I don't remember watching much of the 2002 series, but
yeah, the 2002 series was on UPN, and I didn't have UPN, and no one did. That's why UPN failed. But so I didn't catch much of the 2002 series. I did catch more of the other revival series, but yeah, that one I haven't caught up much. One of these days when I find it on streaming, I'll binge the heck out of it. But I think it was only 2 seasons.
Yeah, there's also let's see, there's also a bit of trivia on here about a controversy on the broadcast date. It says on the same day as the screening of this episode, director Richard Baer and William Reynolds, who plays Fitzgerald, were filming the TV series The Islanders and were in a plane crash. With one person on board the plane being killed, Reynolds claims Rod Serling pulled the episode from its scheduled screening date out of concern for the families of Reynolds and Baer. And then in a researched 2008 Twilight Zone book, it was concluded that the episode did indeed air as originally scheduled, despite Reynolds' statements. So,
well, and that's always interesting.
Yeah.
You know, my first degree of way too many is a degree in history, and I love when history gets muddled by the lack of strong memory that people have. So, you're sitting here 40 years later, 30, 40 years later thinking, no, this actually happened. And then it takes another 20 years to figure out if you guys right or not. Another, since we're talking trivia on this one, originally, for all those Quantum Leap fans, Dean Stockwell was supposed to be in this episode, playing Fitz. And I think we see actually Dean Stockwell will be in an episode a while down the road, about a year and some change for us in this review process. But I think seeing Dean Stockwell would have been interesting to me, just because I am a amazingly huge, I don't know why I keep saying amazingly, but I'm a huge Quantum Leap fan. And those who know Quantum Leap, Dean Stockwell's character was a POW in Vietnam for quite some time. So seeing him in a World War II type episode would have been interesting too. But you can always tell an episode that isn't bad at all, but there's not too much going on because we try to fill in the rest of our 20 to 30 minutes by other things.
I know it's really good with really strong performances, and I can't really say much more about it.
Well, and I think we're going to have the same kind of thing next week. This is the middle of the season. Season 1 is 36 episodes.
Yeah.
And we're on episode 19, and I think 20 we're going to run into the same thing, and that is when you're writing a series like this and you're trying to get it out so quickly, a lot of times you're going to have that one sentence idea, like, what if a soldier knows his guys are going to die before they die? And then you fill in an episode like that, and it's a great episode, but because your theme is pretty tight, there's not much else to diverge from that.
Yeah. Although next week there's a couple little oddities in that episode that'll be interesting.
The episode's odd to begin with, but
yeah.
And and we're potentially doing a disservice to this episode because we're not talking about fate and destiny as much as this episode. Excuse me, as much as this episode would like us to, but part of that is because I know there are episodes coming that are going to delve into fate and destiny a lot more, and so I'm kind of holding back a bit in that discussion because I think we'll have more fodder to deal with that. I apologize for the pun of fodder in a World War II episode review, but we'll have more ability to talk about that down the road. So I'm not really getting into that rabbit hole yet.
Well, the thing about I've noticed in the Serling World War II episodes I've seen, though, is there's a, having fought in World War II the way he did, there is a reverence that is in most of these episodes. Serling doesn't try and parody himself too much in those episodes. There's a real reverence and a real seriousness in all of these episodes. So each one is kind of a piece of something he felt during that time.
Agreed.
So I guess now we'll segue into our rankings for this episode, though. And if you're just joining us now, we rank these Twilight Zone episodes on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best Twilight Zone has to offer, 5 being an average Twilight Zone episode, good, but average, and 1 being, as Scott likes to put it, bewitching pool, which I am saving till the very last moment to be the grand finale.
Do yourself a favor. Do not watch ahead. I know in the next 3 years you're going to be very tempted to put on bewitching pool. Just wait. It will be like a good curdled cheese. It will be well worth it.
Oh my gosh! So Scott, where in your rankings would you put the Purple Testament?
This is a hard one for me because, again, I said I liked the episode, and it's definitely an above the average episode. It's just, do I give it an 8 and put it up there with some of the really good episodes we've run into, or do I give it a 7, which is still way above average? And I think it doesn't come up to the standards that my 8 rankings have been getting. And in a few weeks, spoilers, I will be giving out a much higher ranking. But so I'm going to give it a 7.
And you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to give it a 7 too. So, because for me, when I think about the episodes I gave 8, 9s, and 10s to, this episode has a strong story, strong characters, strong actors. A good thing, but the 8, 9s, and 10s just sort of left me a little more with a wow factor, sort of. That this is a very simply told, quiet story almost.
Yeah,
and,
this is
which is its strength, but it just doesn't stand out quite as much.
Yeah, and after joking that I really need to go back and write down our scores, I finally did, and this is actually only your second 7. Your other 7 was Where Is Everybody, the first episode.
Oh, so well,
yeah. So
that's good company.
Yeah, and I only have ranked 3 episodes above this one: Walking Distance, Third from the Sun, and Hitchhiker. So this is definitely a high up episode for me.
Good, cool.
We're gonna have fun with stats at the end of the season.
Oh man, wait till our season ending episode. Well.
We're only 17 weeks away.
Oh man. We're waiting until we get to actually look at Rod when he actually shows himself in the episodes.
I keep waiting for that, and I know it's not going to happen soon. Although there is an interesting little tidbit at the end of the Netflix version of the next episode, but we'll save that for the next time. But yeah,
although I have a friend who has the Twilight Zone DVD set, and I borrowed a couple from him a couple weeks ago, and I've noticed, and you don't see them on Netflix or Hulu, but at the end of every episode, there's at least in season 1, there's a teaser, and sometimes you actually see Rod talking about what next week's episode will be about.
And now a word from Mr. Serling.
Yeah, the creator of Twilight Zone.
Yes.
So those are kind of preambles to what we'll get in season 2. Not quite as stylized.
Agreed.
But yeah.
And we kind of passed over a milestone, and we didn't talk about when we hit the milestone. But now we are actually 12% done. So we've already passed the 10% threshold.
Well, that's good. That makes me feel better. Oh man. Well, Scott, as we wrap up this episode here for the Purple Testament, and before I read Rod's final words for this episode, do a little plugging and tell them, remind them about our new feed and everything.
Yeah, I would love to do some plugging. You can always find us at the frontrowmoviereviews.com. There you'll see links to all of the past 19 shows, including links to the YouTube shows as well, too, if you're checking out the video feed. And I know I'm a little behind in the video feed, but I promise I'll catch up here soon. It's been a crazy month, but I'll catch up, I promise. And I want to thank everybody. We had this crazy idea for this TV show review on a movie podcast review channel, and we decided early on that we would be spinning this off into its own feed so people can find it easier. And we did that a few weeks ago, and amazingly, we almost have as many subscribers to the new feed as the Front Row has subscribers to all of the shows that we put on the Front Row's main feed. So there definitely is an audience here, and we're really excited to see that. And hopefully, if you're finding us for the first time, please make sure to subscribe. If you're checking us out on iTunes or Podbean or whatever, please make sure to give us a favorable rating and a little comment about us, because that helps other people find us. And if you want to talk with us about Twilight Zone or anything else that the Front Row does, feel free to give us an email too at thefrontrowmoviereviews@gmail.com.
And just to plug something else, I guess, real quick, Scott and I actually earlier this week, and I don't know exactly, it should drop sometime this month, but we talked about another 60s phenomenon.
No. I'm hoping actually that will be out before this is, I think. I think Jeremy's going to drop it next week. And this is going to drop Friday. So I hope. If not, maybe it'll be like Young Frankenstein, and one day it will show up.
One day. And, well, we can add the Searchers to that, too. There's 2 Lost Classics episodes right now. So hopefully.
So a century from now, people will argue when the air dates actually were, so. Callback.
So before, as we close out this episode here, let me read to you Rod's final words. And he actually here is quoting Shakespeare. From William Shakespeare, Richard III, a small excerpt. The line reads, "He has come to open the purple testament of bleeding war. And for Lieutenant William Fitzgerald, a company, 1st Platoon, the testament is closed. Has found the Twilight Zone."
And a landmine, for that matter.
Yeah. He could have avoided it.
Sometimes you just go with what destiny throws you, man.
Yeah.
Although I'm definitely not a believer in destiny, but that's for another day.
Yeah, there's many more episodes to come. So as we conclude this episode 19 of Zone-i-Sodes, I am Brandon Davis.
I am Scott McFarland.
And we will see you on the couch.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Zone-i-Sodes. Zone-i-Sodes is a special presentation of the Front Row Movie Reviews podcast. For more information, go to www.thefrontrowmoviereviews.com.